Come on, Popo. You get one. Come on. Yeah. I wish you had a zipper for me. Tara. Come on, Kang.
Connie, get up.
Come on, Kang. What is it? Okay.
Connie, be good. Stop acting that way. You're gonna go with Papa.
Cut it out. Cut it out, Kang. Cut it out. Cut it out. Cut it out. I mean, you better cut it out. Come on. Let's go over here. Come on. Give me that part. Come on, Connie. You want to get up here? What? Come on, Connie. Let's go, Connie. Let's go. Go get your sister, Paul. Go get your sister. Let's go. You're not gonna shut up? I'm gonna spank you. You're making us all this noise. I'll spank you. Come on. Let's go over here while these people. Give me your hand. Hold it, Forrest. Hold it. That's what you want? Hey, that's what you want, a spanking? Let's go, Connie. Connie. I really gotta spank you? Or what? What do I have to do to you? To get you to come on. Well, let's go. Get my hand. Get my hand, let's go now. Come on. Come on, boy. Connie, open your eyes, girl, so you can see now. Come on. Watch it for it. What did I tell you? Now let's go. about starting things for you. What's wrong with you? You come over here for that? Is this what you come for? You still playing your part in this world? Come on.
Let us pray.
Give me a goddamn bottle, man.
We thank thee, O God, for your love to us.
Oh, we love.
We thank thee for the life and ministry of Martin Luther King. We thank thee for the cutting edge of your presence that touches our lives yet today because of him. Let us continue to celebrate his living presence in our daily work, in our play life, and in our city life, so that the light that he set aglow will not go out until all men, all women, all everywhere will be free to celebrate, will be free to work, will be free to share, will be free to live, will be free to grow. This is our prayer. In your name we pray.
Recently, the city of Phoenix had a change of the guard, and on behalf of the city of Phoenix, here's our recently elected mayor, Mayor Terry Goddard.
Thank you. It's very exciting and an honor to be here today, hopefully with the beginning of many jumping of the guns on behalf of Phoenix and Arizona on worthwhile projects. And we are in fact jumping the gun on the National Martin Luther King Day, but I think it's very appropriate that we should do so. I also have a proclamation on behalf of the city of Phoenix, which I'd like to read at this time. Whereas Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., a great leader in this country's history, spoke often and eloquently of the constant need to raise every man, woman, and child to his or her real potential, and whereas he served his nation as a theologian, prophet, and peacemaker through the quality of his nonviolent approach to seeking the American dream for all Americans, and whereas, to show our love and respect for this fallen leader, our nation shall commemorate a day in his honor as a national holiday, and whereas this nation will officially begin to celebrate the national holiday in 1985, now therefore I, Terry Goddard, Mayor of the City of Phoenix, do hereby proclaim January 15th, 1984 as Martin Luther King Day, and urge all citizens of our city to join with me in the celebration of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day in Phoenix. Thank you very much.
I think there's a slight difference in the mayor's height and mine. No program that has a gathering of people who sing and march of freedom, no program would be appropriate without that audience standing and singing at this time an old favorite, Lift Every Voice and Sing, a song that was once known as the Negro National Anthem, but now it's just a warm song in our heart, and it remains an anthem because we have not yet overcome. We still must overcome. Shall we sing, lift every voice and sing? Is Michael on? That beautiful voice that you heard join us was the voice of Mrs. Shirley Montague, who at breakneck speed left another celebration at Luke Air Force Base and came here just on cue. Thank you, Shirley. There are reasons for celebrating the birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King that many speakers will share with you here today. But he was first a man. Here to share with you his thoughts on Dr. Martin Luther King, the man, is the Reverend Glenn Bembry.
To Mayor Terry Goddard, the Phoenix City Council, members and friends, it is indeed a delight to share with you today reflections on Martin Luther King Jr. as a man. I remember as a child at age 12, the very date that Martin Luther King was assassinated. I remember him at that time, very young and not knowing what he was about, but later going on and to study what his life reflected. And so the identity of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was the pressure to live two identities. As a public man, he was outgoing, strong in his beliefs, stirring the hearts of people throughout the country. So this man had two identities. And so Dr. King would often retreat at times in his own private world in order to regenerate the inner man. As a man, he lived on Auburn Avenue in Atlanta, Georgia. Just a few blocks away from the church he co-pastored with his father. As a man, because of his extensive travels, he was often not at home. In spite of his absence, Dr. King would cram weekends to give special attention to his lovely wife, Coretta Scott King, and his 4 children, Yolanda Denise, Martin Luther King III, Dexter, and Bernice. As a man, he would come home to entertain himself with his children, playing games with his children on the steps of his home. His children were obsessed with understanding their father, who was not at home. As a man, he would rise early in the mornings, reading books, paddling about the house, playing with his children, listening to the operatic records and tinkering with the piano. And he was also, as a man, a very fond person of cooking. He was an advocate for very good meals. As a man, he loved a hearty meal of steak and black-eyed peas and collard greens and barbecue. But what manner of man was this, born on January 15th, 1929? As a man, he had the highest confidence in himself. As a man, he was complex with many faces, a mystic man, flowing out with strong and determined faith in himself and others. As a man, he was possessed, gripped by God. He was quoted as saying, "History has thrust me into this position, and it would be both immoral and a sign of ingratitude if I did not face my moral responsibility to do what I can in this struggle." As a man, he lived with threats made on his life daily. As a man, he gives young people today an example of which we can worthily model ourselves after. As a man, both public and private, he was determined to do his mission. As a man, yes, he was complex, but as a man, he dared to dream the impossible dream. But because of this man, America was made better. Because of this man, one man that was scorned and battered by the scars of a negative America. As a man, we can say all today that we're happy to know that this man passed through this life. As a man, we can celebrate his birthday today and rejoice 16 years later, saying praise be to God that we have finally made it a national holiday. Martin Luther King Jr. as a man. Thank you.
Would Tanya Holmes please come up? As a man, as any man who leads a movement as mighty as the movement led by Martin Luther King, there are many stirring songs, and they raise the consciousness of the people, and it keeps the people from getting tired. But once in a while, a leader has to go and reach and calm his soul, and we are told that Dr. Martin Luther King chose an old spiritual whose name is Precious Lord. For those of us who lived during those days, and for those of us who came after, at some time or the other, a rerun on TV, an album in somebody's home, we've all heard the magnificent voice of Dr. Martin Luther King and his famous "I Had a Dream" speech. We have raised in our valley a young man with a tremendous talent who knows that speech, and he is going to deliver it here today. Ladies and gentlemen, the words of Dr. Martin Luther King as delivered to you by Kenneth Franklin.
First, I'd like to say, with respect to God, to the Mayor, Terry Goddard, to the rest of the distinguished guests, I'm honored to be here. And as I was watching on TV, I see that many cities across the nation are commemorating this day. And it made me feel good to be able to know that Dr. Martin Luther King was a man that stood for peace, he stood for justice, and he stood for freedom. And without further ado, these are the words that Dr. Martin Luther King spoke on that 23rd day of August, 1963. I am happy to join in with you today in what will go down as the greatest demonstration of freedom ever recorded in the history of our nation. 50 years ago, a great American, in whose symbolic shadow we now stand, signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the withering flames of injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro must face the tragic fact that he is still not free. 100 years later, the lives of the Negro are sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro still finds himself on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material wealth. 100 years later, the Negro still finds himself lingering in the outskirts of the American society and in exile in his own land. So we have come here today to dramatize this shameful condition. In a sense, we have come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of this republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were in a sense signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. But it is evident today that America has defaulted on its promissory note, and as far as its citizens of color are concerned, instead of honoring this sacred obligation, she has given the Negro people a bad check. A check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the banks of justice are bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. So we have come to cash this check. A check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the securities of justice. We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxuries of cooling off or by taking the tranquilizing drugs of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to lift our nation from the dark and desolate valleys of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to open the doors of opportunity to all of God's children. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment and to underestimate the Negro's legitimate discontent. For the sweltering summers of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until there is an invigorating autumn of freedom. Those who hope that the Negro just needed to blow off steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if this nation returns to business as usual. 1963 is not an end but a beginning. For the whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundations of this nation until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. There are those who ask the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We will never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We will never be satisfied as long as our bodies, heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot lodge in the motels of our highways and the hotels of our cities. We will never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their dignity and robbed of their selfhood by signs stating for whites only. We will never be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. No, we will never be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. But there is something that I must say to my people who stand on the warm threshold which leads into the palace of justice. In the processes of gaining our rightful places, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. We must not allow our creative protests to disintegrate into physical violence. We must again and again conduct our struggle on the high planes of dignity and discipline. We must continue to rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. This marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community must not lead to the hatred and the distrust of all white people. For as evidenced by their presence here today, some of them have come to realize that their freedom is somewhat tied to our freedom, that their destiny is inextricably bound to our destiny. We cannot go alone. And as we march, we must continue to make the pledge that we will always march ahead, knowing that we will be free one day. But there is something I'm not unmindful that some of you have come out of deep trials and tribulations. Some of you have come from fresh, narrow jail cells. Ye have been the victims of creative suffering. But continue to work with the faith that unearned suffering is redemptive. But I say to you today, go back to Mississippi. Go back to Alabama. Go back to Georgia. Go back to Atlanta. Go back to the slums and the ghettos of our northern cities, knowing that this situation can and will be changed. But I say to you today, my friends, though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. That we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that even on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to join hands together. I have a dream that down in Mississippi, with its vicious races, and whose governor's lips are presently dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, will be transformed into a situation where little black boys and little black girls will be able to join hands together as brothers and sisters. I have a dream today. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day be able to live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I shall dream that every valley shall be exalted. Every hill and molehill shall be made low. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it. This is our hope. This is the faith with which I return to the South. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to turn the dangling discords of our nation into a symphony of brotherhood. With this hope, we will be able to work together and pray together and stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. And this is the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning. My country, 'tis of thee. Sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died. Land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom reign. And if America is to be a great nation, this must come true. So let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the Stone Mountain in Georgia. Let freedom ring from the curvaceous peaks of California. Not only that, let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. And when we let freedom ring, when we let it ring from every city and every state, from every village and every hamlet, we will be able to speed up that great day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the Negro spiritual of old, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, I'm free at last. All right.
In the beauty of the lilies, Christ was born across the sea, with a beauty in his bosom that transfigures you and me. As he died to make men holy, let us die to make men free. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on.
Dr. Martin Luther King, the man. Now, there are citizens who are seated behind me who will share with you their reminiscences and memories of Dr. King and his impact on Phoenix, Vice Mayor Calvin C. Good.
Thank you, Mrs. Opal Alice. The mayor has already presented the proclamation, so I join him in bringing official greetings from the entire Phoenix City Council and the 840,000 people of Phoenix. You know, I feel fortunate because I lived in Martin Luther King's day. He was 2 years younger than I. I want to also commend all who have had a part in putting this very appropriate program together. To all of you here, certainly this celebration is in order. I view Martin Luther King as a prophet who was called to speak to America about war and peace, called to speak to America about social justice and racial discrimination, called to speak to America about its obligation to the poor, and to speak to America about nonviolence. I can't remember when my parents brought me to Arizona in 1927, but I do remember when I finished the great school in Gila Bend, and they said you can't go to the high school because God gave you too much pigment in your skin. I can remember when we came to Phoenix in 1944 and could not attend any one of the schools in Phoenix. I enjoyed attending Phoenix Carver High School, but I also would have liked to have had the opportunity to go to any school I so chose. I can remember in 1953, when we had to sue the Wilson School District in order to remove black kids going to school in a shack out on West Buckeye Road. I can remember in 1954 when they closed Carver High School and said they were going to integrate the schools in the city of Phoenix. I can remember when they denied me a job as we closed Carver High School, again because I was black. What I'm saying to you folks, that the Martin Luther King impact on this country certainly started in 1954 with the Montgomery boycott in Alabama. And it's ironic that in 1964, when he was shot, he was still working for people in terms of the sanitation strike in Tennessee. I can remember, folks, when Morrison Warren, we're talking about the middle 60s. Martin Luther King came to Phoenix in the early 60s, and I can remember very distinctly when Reverend Brooks and others of us sponsored his visit here. I can remember, folks, in 1966, when Morrison Warren was the first black elected to the Phoenix City Council and served to 1970. We're talking about impact on Phoenix. I can remember in 1970 when I was elected. Remember, only 5% of the black population in Phoenix is here. I can remember, folks, when we had marches here, marches formed by Reverend Brooks and by Lincoln Ragsdale, when we marched from Eastlake Park out to the Capitol. I can remember when we had sit-ins downtown here to make people serve people regardless of their race or their creed or their color. What I'm saying to you folks is the impact of Martin Luther King has been nationwide, it has been local-wide, and it has been worldwide. So in terms of the political impact on Phoenix, it has been great. But I want you to know, folks, we have not certainly arrived. The things that he lived for, the things that he died for, are things that I challenge all of you. As I tell young people every day, I want every right guaranteed to me as an American citizen. No more, no less. I say also to young folks, we have the greatest nation in the world. But we have some problems here. And until those problems go away in terms of making this city, this nation, open to all people, then I say our task has not been completed. And even though Martin Luther King was killed in 1968, his voice was silenced. His memory continues on. And the challenge is up to us each one of us, to not only celebrate today, but to go forth from this day and make Phoenix, make the state of Arizona, make this nation a country that will serve all people in justice and peace and all of the kinds of things he died for. Thank you.
While some of those activities were occurring in Phoenix, there were many ministers and many people across this city who walked with Dr. George Brooks and Mr. Lincoln Ragsdale. One of those men was a minister who is here with us tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, Reverend Ray Manker.
Thank you very much. One of the very important events of my life was when I was privileged to sit on the platform with Dr. King in Tempe as he had addressed us in one of his visits, and then later to march with him on the last day of his famous march from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. I was asked to look for a minute or two upon the impact of Martin Luther King Jr. on the world. In the third world, the presence of outstanding black leadership is expected, even if those leaders are generally judged by a different standard by Western whites than they judged their own leadership. The black leader in the predominantly white Western world has an infinitely more difficult time achieving the recognition properly due. And unfortunately, oftentimes when it comes, in some way is found to demean it. When Duke Ellington and Nat King Cole, Louis Armstrong, and others took leadership in the field of music, it was acceptable because blacks are just naturally musical. When Joe Louis and Jackie Robinson broke the color line and blacks began to dominate boxing, baseball, basketball, football, that was acceptable after a while because blacks are just naturally athletic. When Thurgood Marshall became Justice of the Supreme Court, it was purely a political appointment. But when Martin Luther King Jr. took the leadership of the Birmingham bus boycott and then openly defied a court order and in an act of civil disobedience went to jail in Birmingham in 1963, he captured the moral leadership in such a manner as perhaps only Gandhi before him had done. And there was no way that it could be effectively demeaned. In spite of all that a bigoted J. Edgar Hoover could do, and it was considerable, Martin Luther King Jr. assumed ethical and religious leadership in the United States and in the world. This was acknowledged by awarding him the Nobel Prize for Peace in 1964. Having achieved that pinnacle, however, he did not slow him one bit. He continued exercising and enhancing his leadership. He led the successful fight for the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Bill of 1965, guided and focused the moral revulsion of the nation over the Vietnam War, led the Poor People's Campaign, and finally, supporting the Sanitation Workers Union strike in Memphis, Tennessee, was assassinated, non-violent to the end. There was no other in the 20th century to come close to the moral, ethical, and religious leadership of Martin Luther King Jr. In a world which in its insanity over power has produced and is continuing to produce weapons of mass destruction so powerful that even the leaders cannot comprehend their meaning, where every nation seems determined to exercise power and control over other nations by violent means, where terrorists killed indiscriminately, and even the President of the United States has pointedly and publicly rejected the biblical injunction for peace, declaring that we tried beating our swords into plowshares and that it didn't work and that we won't try that again. The non-violent, ethical, and religious leadership of Martin Luther King Jr. grows bigger, more impressive, and increasingly important day by day, year by year. The impact of Martin Luther King Jr. on the world is already immense. In the years to come, it will be immeasurable.
Are the members of the Victory Baptist Church present? No mention of the impact of Dr. Martin Luther King on Phoenix could end without this gentleman coming on this stage and sharing with you, and having you who do not know him, who have not seen him, who were too young to remember him, come forth and share with us the impact that Dr. Martin Luther King had on him. Ladies and gentlemen, Reverend George Benjamin Brooks.
All right.
I suppose that I am among the few people in Phoenix who could classify Martin Luther King as a friend, one with whom I had very deep association, one with whom I marched in the state of Georgia to break down the walls of segregation in that city, and one who came to Phoenix at my invitation and that of Lincoln Ragsdale to share with this community that theological philosophy that he had, that America is indeed a land that had promised to all of its citizens the pursuit of happiness, and had denied to a great section of that community that opportunity. He came to Phoenix one hot day, warm, beautiful, sunny day. He came, he saw, and he conquered. Phoenix has not been the same since, because Martin Luther came this way. He met with the Chamber of Commerce, he spoke at the university, and the president of that university introduced him, a man who was an avowed racist, but after he had introduced Martin Luther King, became convinced that he had to change, and he had to make some changes at Arizona State University. Martin Luther King died a tragic death, and America lost a great hero. And it seems to me most appropriate that we now celebrate his birthday. And I rejoice that in 1985, that birthday will be celebrated by all Americans, whether they like it or not. Ladies and gentlemen, if we are to keep alive the dream of Martin Luther King. If we are not to move backward as we did after the Civil War, we must indeed pursue good education. We must make sure that those in power meet across the table with us to share power. And I mean that political power, I mean that social power, and I need that economic power. Because one nation, one part of that nation that has affluence, and the other part living in poverty is not a free nation. You and I have the responsibility to make America free, and you and I therefore have the obligation and the command to call upon those who sit in the seat of power today to meet with us to again negotiate the transfer of some of that power in order that little children, little boys and little girls might catch again the flame that Martin Luther King lit and carry it on so that this nation will be that invincible nation that it ought to be. God bless all of you. Thank you.
Dr. Martin Luther King, a man for all people, a man who reached across the differences in language, the differences in color, to form a linkage between the people and among the people of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, to share with you, Councilwoman Mary Rose Wilcox.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis, for inviting me here today to honor Martin Luther King Jr. on this day set aside for his memory. I vividly remember the day Martin Luther King Jr. was killed. I was a college sophomore and was just beginning to become involved in the driving forces of the 60s that led to such dramatic changes throughout our country. I remember the sadness and feeling of hopelessness experienced by many that day. And I like to think that each of us, by being here today, speaking his or her thoughts, bring back the hope and the dreams Martin Luther King Jr. had for all America. The thing I most admired that Martin Luther King Jr. had a major responsibility and the major drive behind was passage of the Voter Rights Act of 1965. Voting is a method by which people choose their leaders and decide on public issues. It is one of our most important rights because it allows us to choose who will govern us. In 1965, Martin Luther began a voter rights campaign that led to the passage of the Voter Rights Act. This act suspended voter tests in states where fewer than half the adults voted, permitted federal examiners to register voters, and required the federal government to sue to bar poll taxes as a voting requirement in state elections. This act opened the door for minorities throughout America to share in the most important right as a United States citizen, that of voting. In Spanish, the phrase, su voto es su voz, is your vote is your voice. It's the most important political rule I feel we should live by today. The people of Phoenix exercised their voting and voted in a brand new city district system, one that will allow all citizens to participate in city government to a greater degree, and one that I feel opened the doors of City Hall. As the first council member from District 7 in this new district, and as the first Hispanic woman elected to the City of Phoenix City Council, I want to thank you, Martin Luther King, for being such a large part of obtaining the vote for all people in America.
Ladies and gentlemen, Monsignor Donahue could not be here tonight, and in his stead we have with us Father Francis.
Are eclipsed by fear, violence, and mistrust, and we soon forget human dignity and dialogue and regress back to the rule of the jungle, the bully, the boss, the powerful few. Montgomery, Alabama is where it began, as you heard Judge Williams state. A Negro seamstress, Mrs. Rosa Parks, refused to obey a local bus driver's order to sit at the back of the bus. She was tired, she said, and she refused to give up her seat to a white passenger. No one knew that day that her action was to result in a 381-day boycott of Montgomery's public transportation system by blacks. This single act of womanly courage and black pride was the catalyst for a series of events that would have repercussions throughout the South, and it was to make Martin Luther King Jr. a spokesman for the American Negro, and for that matter, a champion of everybody's human rights. From relative obscurity as the minister of his church, in 1954, Dr. King rose to lead the boycott. This victory established Dr. King as a man of action and illustrated the wisdom of his philosophy of nonviolence, which he formulated from his readings of Gandhi and Thoreau. From there, it was on to a string of other cities: Birmingham, Selma, St. Augustine, Chicago, Watts, and finally Memphis. Every place where bigotry had to be fought. King became a living example of the power of right to triumph over injustice. The quality of life in our cities and the social network of relationships between the millions of Americans who live there is still far from perfect. But schools have been desegregated, neighborhoods have been opened up to a greater degree, housing and employment, at least in the eyes of the law, must be non-discriminately offered to all people. We can all drink at the same fountain and sit together in the same restaurant. Yet the disease of racist hate has deep roots, however. Blacks still suffer the highest disproportionate rate of unemployment in our country and seem to fare the worst in our justice system, particularly on death row, that grisly barbaric specter on the American scene. And many of them constitute the thousands of homeless individuals and families in our country, which is a national disgrace. Nonetheless, our consciousness as a people has been raised by the vision and valor of the man whose memory we celebrate today. Not every generation is blessed to experience the kind of monumental breakthroughs and enlargement of the human spirit which he brought about. What Moses did for his oppressed people 12 centuries before Christ, we have seen another prophet do in our own times, in our own midst. Like David, he stood up bravely to a primitive and powerful giant, and he won. The great moral war he waged is over. Now you and I must mop up and put the finishing touches to his achievement and lay claim to the heritage he has left us. Like Jesus, he sought first and foremost to do God's will, which is to advance the cause of man and to enrich in every way possible the human family, the children of God. For this cause, he lived, and in this cause, he was slain. But the dream will never die, and the unforgettable voice, like a call resonating in the depths of our being, still rings across the land. if we are arrested every day, if we are exploited every day, if we are trampled over every day, don't ever let anyone pull you so low as to hate them. We must use the weapon of love. We must have compassion and understanding for those who hate us, he said. We must realize so many people are taught to hate us that they are not totally responsible for their hate. But we stand in life at midnight. We are always on the threshold of a new dawn.
I know you're getting cold, but children, don't you get weary and don't you get tired. He's worth it this one time. Ladies and gentlemen, County Supervisor Ed Pastore.
Good evening, friends of Martin Luther King. It's very appropriate that we are here at a park that recognizes the efforts and deeds of patriots. We're at Patriots Park. And as we have read in history, we have had American patriots come forward when there was an oppressive government. When Dr. King saw the oppression of prejudice, he led the revolution against it. Great American patriots have come forth where they have seen unjust laws and unfair laws. Dr. King came forward as a patriot and helped change unfair, unjust laws that kept us from participating in the political system. The cause, the memory of Dr. King is not only a black cause or a black memory. It is a universal cause and it's a universal memory. Civil rights, human rights is a universal struggle. You must realize, my friends, that when Dr. King came forth and when Mexican Americans heard the term justice for all, they understood that the movement of the Chicano was a right movement because we had to correct things. You must understand, my friends, that when Native Americans heard Dr. King say liberty for all, they realized that their efforts in bringing liberty, freedom from hunger, freedom from what, to their people was a just cause. My friends, you have to realize that when Dr. King said equality for all, that caused all of us to be aware that in this country we were not equal because in many cases we considered women in a different light. The cause is a universal cause. And I tell you this evening that as a Mexican American